Hello everyone, how you doing? I'm Edgar along with Tom, and welcome to ADJ webinar number 2. Today we're going to talk about the CPX series active speakers. We're going to give you a lot of knowledge as far as speaker terminology that you might be hearing. And so real quick, I'm along with Tom here. This is Tom Freret, the American Audio Manager. Tom, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
How's everyone doing? I'm Tom Freret with American Audio. We're going to talk about speakers today. A lot of people know American Audio from controllers and from DJ technology, but what a lot of people don't know is we do really well with amplifiers and speakers. In fact, one of the things, plastic speakers right now are very popular. Active speakers are very popular. American Audio was one of the first companies to come out with a plastic active speaker over 15 years ago, the APX Power Pro. And there's still a few of them out there, people love them. And so today we're going to talk about CPX, speaker advancements, and before we get into that, we're going to talk about terminology and different things. And the goal of the webinar today is to have fun, help you guys understand a little bit about sound and speakers, and talk about our latest speaker, the new CPX. So I'll hand it back to Edgar here.
All right, well, Tom, I took down some notes, and I gathered information from DJ buddies and guys that are out there, maybe on the market for some speakers, and I took down some speaker terms that we hear about. So I'm going to just go down the list, ask you about them, and maybe you can answer, what it means, as far as in the speaker world.
All right.
So the first one is woofer.
Woofer, wow. That's what a dog does, right?
Sure.
No, the woofer is basically the speaker, the cone, the speaker that's inside the box. The bass is typically called the woofer. So every speaker has one unless it's a horn.
And all kinds of sizes, right?
Yeah, 8s, 10s, 12s. Even your computer speakers on your desk have typically a little tiny woofer in them, but that's typically where the bass comes out of the speaker, whereas the paper part is the woofer.
Nice. All right, and how about horn?
Horn is the top of the speaker, and that's where the treble's going to come out, the mids and highs. So, and there's a couple kinds of horns. We're going to talk about that as we go on. Typically, a speaker is going to have a woofer and a horn.
All right, and tweeter?
That's a good question. Tweeter, typically, there's two types of tweeters. There's a tweeter like in a music playback or a home speaker, which has, we've all seen it, the little dome on it. And sometimes people break them and wonder what it is. And it's typically round on the top. And that's home stereo speakers or very inexpensive music playback speakers typically have a tweeter.
All right, this guy's good. All right, how about a driver?
A driver is where you're getting into more of a professional speaker. On the horn, some horns have a tweeter on the back. Some are actually going to have what's called a compression driver. And that's going to give you a lot more output. It's typically screwed on the back of the horn. The difference too in application, if you're using a tweeter, typically they're okay for music playback. Like if Edgar's in his studio and he has some monitors in there, those speakers are going to have tweeters in them, and they're going to have a real smooth high end. It's going to really sound nice. They're typically not going to throw the sound very far, but it's going to sound really good. If your speaker has a driver on it, it's going to be where you can use microphones and really project the sound a lot better. So if you have a speaker with a tweeter in it, not going to be so good with the microphone, live applications. That's where you step up and you need a driver, and that's where if you're in a live band or using a monitor or an installation where you want the sound to project, you're going to use some live microphones. That's where you're going to want a driver.
Good, okay, so it sounds like driver is very important as far as when you're picking the right speaker. Next, can you kind of talk about trapezoidal, what that means?
Sure. Trapezoidal simply means the shape of the box. Typically, if a box curves back on the back, it's trapezoidal versus a conventional box, which is going to be square, rectangle. So if you're looking at speakers, and I know people buy things online sometimes, a lot more every day, and it says trapezoidal speaker design, all that means is it's going to be smaller in the back than the front. The width is going to be narrower in the back than it is in the front.
And does that have anything to do with the sound of the speaker, or?
Not really too much. It'll shape the sound a little bit, but it's more how you can use the sound. It gives a little bit more flexibility. If you're going to put speakers together to cover an area, if they're boxes and you're putting them flat, it's going to negatively affect the sound. If it's trapezoidal and you're putting them together, ideally it's going to make the sound better and the coverage better. Also, depending on the shape of the box, trapezoidal a lot of times has multiple angles where you can use it as a floor monitor as well as a full range speaker and not need any extra things to put it on the floor and have it be the correct angle.
All right, good. Well, that brings me to the next one, which is monitor. When you hear monitor speaker, what exactly does that mean?
That has two different applications. One is a floor monitor or a side fill monitor, and that would be in a live application where, and if you've ever been in a band, You probably go like this a lot to the sound guy. It means turn it up, turn my monitors up. They never, live bands, they never seem to be loud enough. But a monitor can be a floor monitor where you want to hear yourself, whether you're singing or playing guitar, or a side fill monitor where the sound's coming from the side of the stage. That's one type of monitor. The other type is what Edgar and Jose behind the computer have in their studios, which is going to be a studio monitor. And that's getting accurate reproduction of what's going on, whether you're recording music or doing a live webinar or recording video. So there's studio monitors and live monitors. And nowadays DJs have monitors as well.
Yeah, definitely. Monitors are very important so you can hear the music that you're playing. Yeah, thank you for that.
Let me ask you something, Edgar, and I don't mean to get off track. Why would a DJ use a monitor, especially if they're in a big room or in a club?
Well, for one, I would say the echo, the reverb that you get from when you're playing music really loud. From my personal experience, I used to do a lot of DJ competitions, and it's one thing when you hear your scratch or you're hearing the song that's playing, but by the time you hear it when it's coming back to you when you're in a large room, it doesn't sound like what you're actually doing. So in a performance, it can be pretty crucial. It can mess up your mix, or it can mess up the way you're trying to make a certain sound. And so, it's funny that you mentioned monitors. It was always really nice when I would do these competitions and I have floor monitors, and if it was at a great volume where I can hear exactly what was coming out from, I was doing to make sure that everything was coming too.
Good.
Cool. All right, well, the next one I want to talk about is you're probably buying speakers, or you're looking in the market for speakers, and you might hear about fly points. What are fly points?
Fly points are typically on the cabinet where it's going to have threaded grommets, or the cabinet's going to be threaded where you can put eye bolts on them, or a flying hardware bracket where you can actually hang the speakers up in the air. It's really important if you ever plan to do that, and more people are, is events get bigger and people are working in tents and doing different things where you can actually fly your speakers from truss or from the ceiling. It's critical if you are doing that to make sure that the speaker has it included. You don't want to, and we've all been to the club during happy hour, whether you're singing a band or a DJ, and sometimes you look up and they have eye bolts threaded in an old wooden cabinet. Not a good way to go. You want to make sure the speaker has integrated fly hardware if you plan to do that. Nowadays, a lot of the speakers have it. You don't need to, it used to be a premium where it started about $1,000 and you start to see fly hardware, or you would need to order that cabinet with the fly hardware on it, but nowadays most cabinets have it. If you're thinking at some point in the future, you might want to put your speakers up in the air and get, you might have events coming up, everybody's company's growing, hopefully. Look for fly hardware and just make sure it's part of the cabinet, it's not an add-on.
Nice, and that's one thing I noticed about American Audio speakers. We do a lot of trade shows, and it's been very helpful, when we're doing shows, and American Audio speakers are typically always fly ready. And so we can mount those onto truss without having to worry about putting a whole bunch of tripods on the floor. So, all right, well, the next one I want to talk about is actually two types of speakers you hear about. You hear about active, and then you hear about passive. What's the difference between active and passive?
Active basically just means, and some people call it powered, it means the amplifier's in the box. There's typically two kinds of active. One, you're going to have a single amplifier that's going to power all the components, and the second kind is where you're going to be bi-amped, where you're going to have two amplifiers in there, one powering the horn and one powering the woofer.
All right.
And passive is where there's no amplifier in it. Typically, it used to be, and a lot of you probably remember this, you would have an amp rack that you'd wheel in with a big heavy amp. What was the first amp you owned? Do you remember?
Yeah, it was a QSC RMX 2450.
That's a great amp. Had a Sound Craftsman. It was heavier than me at the time. But you had your amp rack you rolled in, and maybe you had an EQ in there, and then you hooked it up to your passive speakers that you wheeled in out of the van, and that's how it went. Nowadays, most speakers have the amplifier built in, so it saves you from having to bring an amplifier and an amp rack. Also, at the end of the day, it's a lot more efficient because one amp is dedicated to your horn, so all the power from that's going to the horn. It has a crossover built in, typically an electronic crossover, hopefully, and then all the power from the woofers going to the woofer. So it's going to be a lot more efficient system. You're going to get better sound because it's all tuned to work in that box by the manufacturer.
All right. Well, since you were talking about crossovers and everything like that, let's talk quickly about full range speakers. What does it mean when a speaker is full range?
It's a great question, Edgar. That means that it's going to have bass, mids, and highs. It's going to reproduce everything. So full range is typically what most people use for their main speakers. It's going to be a full range speaker.
All right, so the next one I want to talk about is subwoofers. Is that a full range speaker since it puts out so much sound, or?
No, subwoofer is going to be bass only. Now, something that's kind of cool that a lot of people don't realize, typically when you start out, whether you're in a band or a DJ like Edgar, is you start with a couple of full range speakers. And you go, man, that really sounds, hopefully you're going, that sounds really good. It has a good driver on the horn. You can hear the vocals, you hear the guitars a little bit, hear the snare drum real well. But you realize you're starting to clip your amp. You're starting to play a little bit bigger gigs, and you're not hearing the drums because in a crossover, what a lot of people don't take into account when they the tops over, and since your full range speakers aren't putting out bass like they used to, they can actually get a lot louder. We're going to talk about watts and bass and all that a little bit later, but now it's going to make your system a lot louder, give you a lot more low end, keep your drummer happy, keep the dance floor happy.
Nice. I mean, that reminds me of my first car. My speakers weren't that great, but I added a subwoofer in the car, and it made everything just sound better, and I was one of the cool kids with a loud system. So I imagine it works for DJs and bands as well.
Yeah.
Nice.
My first car, my speakers, if I hit a bump in my car, they would turn off, and you hit another bump and they turn on.
Oh, well, I want to talk about another one, and I think this has to do a lot, since we're talking about, bands, maybe stages. I want to talk about array systems. What is that exactly?
Arrays have really come into play over the last, 20 or so years. And what it does, they used to just use big speakers and put a lot of components to it. And now if you go to a concert or even a club, you'll typically look up and see, if it's a concert, you'll see 10, 12, 16 speakers, maybe curved on each side of the stage. If you go to the club, you look around and you don't just see a speaker here or there, you see groups of speakers. And what that is specially made speakers that are put together to give you better coverage and also more efficiency. When you put speakers side by side like that, you're getting what's called acoustic coupling, where you're actually getting more output. I believe it's 6 dB, or not 3 dB every time you couple up, and you're getting better coverage. And in a concert situation, you're able to control and cancel out frequencies, and so the people in the front hear a nice sound and the people in the back hear a nice sound, and each speaker might be getting a little bit different power, be tuned or EQ'd a little bit differently, crossed over a little bit, so you're taking all that to give the audience the best experience, best sound possible, no matter where you are in the room.
Good. All right. Well, that brings me to my last one, which is coverage, or speaker coverage. Since there's so many different types of speakers, how is speaker coverage important to know about purchasing your next speaker?
This is really interesting, and this, kind of like the subwoofer and all that, kind of gets overlooked. Different speakers have different coverage. Like our CPX, which we're going to talk about, has a 60 by 90 degree horn on it. Sound, just like lighting, can be thought of like water. And we've all been in the front yard, and you have the hose and you have the trigger handle on it. Edgar, what happens if you make the spray go real wide? How far does it go?
Not as far.
And if you go real narrow, how's the water go?
A lot further.
Exactly. So when you're looking at speakers, you can't control the woofer too much as far as the coverage, but on the horn, the narrower the coverage, and just like it sounds, the narrower the sound goes out, the further it's going to go. The wider the coverage, it's going to go wider, but it's not going to go as far. Edgar, I'm going to quiz you a little bit.
All right.
So if I was looking at floor monitors, and I know when you DJ, you're pretty active. If I had a floor monitor here and I'm moving around a lot while I'm singing, am I going to want narrow coverage, or am I going to want wide coverage?
Wide coverage, I'd imagine.
Exactly. I don't want the drummer hearing my vocals, or I don't want them sounding their best when they're 20 feet away. I want it wide and sounding great close up. So that's the right answer. Good job, Edgar.
All right. Well, now that we heard about all the terms and speaker terminology and all the technical stuff, let's talk about how that applies to our CPX series speakers. Can you do that? Maybe we'll start with the woofer.
Sure, let's do it. So today the CPX, one of the neat things about them is they're available in all sizes. They're active, they're bi-amped. Now we know what that means. We have an 8-inch, a 10-inch, a 12-inch, and a 15-inch. For what we're going to do today, we're going to focus on the 12-inch. So this is the woofer from the 12-inch. This is called the Spider. It's got a cast spider on it. The 12s and the 15 have cast spiders. The 8 and the 10s have stamped.
I'll hold it for the camera if you want.
Okay.
I want to check that out.
So you'll notice a nice large magnet on here. Some speakers, they solder the leads This has easily field replaceable, spring-loaded terminals on it, very high quality. Now another thing, if you could flip it up a little bit like that. Any idea what this hole is, Edgar?
I have no idea what that is.
That hole is there for a big reason, and it's called vented gap cooling. And what that does, we all know that speakers can get hot, and what that does is lets all the heat out so that your speaker can get a little bit hotter. It's not going to overheat. I'm going to sidestep for a minute. Do you know what happens when a speaker blows? We've all had people call us, oh, my speaker's blown. Oh, I don't know what happened, my speaker blew.
I think I've done it, and it looks like it just rips out of the frame or something like that. Is that
Close,
right? Or
close. So you think you've done it? I know you've done it. So basically what happens is, and we've all hopefully at some point seen a speaker taken apart, there's this big magnet on the bottom, and then there's the paper cone that comes down, and at the bottom of the paper cone, there's a copper coil. And the copper coil moves around in a slot in the magnet. The magnet actually makes the coil move, and that produces the sound.
Wow.
Now when your speaker blows, what happens is the coil gets too hot, and there's glue that holds all the wires of the coil together. When the glue lets go, the coil goes and the speakers blow. And so if you're not sure, if all of a sudden your woofer's not working and you're not sure what happened, all you have to do is push on it. Go ahead and push on that. Tell me how it feels, Edgar.
feels firm.
Yeah, smooth?
Yeah, smooth.
Smooth. So if our speaker was blown, it might not move at all. If it did, you'd hear it going like.
I've heard that.
Was that in your first car?
Car, DJ system, everything.
So if it's scraping, that means your speaker's blown. And that's because of heat is one of the main factors. And we'll talk about what makes it heat up. So on CPX, the components have vented gap cooling on the back here. And that's going to let it dissipate heat a lot better than a normal speaker that might not have the hole on the back.
And so, that's very cool, because since you're saying that, since I did blow out some speakers in my time, I can say that I've never actually seen that before in a woofer. So that's a very good feature. I think that's going to allow the speaker to cool down and prevent blowouts and things like that. So I think that's really cool.
Cool. So that's it with the woofer. Again, CPX has a 8, 10, 12, and 15. The 8 and the 10 are stamp frame because they're lighter duty, and the 12 and the 15 have the cast frame on them.
All right, well, I want to talk about the next thing that you have over there. I think that's the driver. Is that right?
This is the driver.
All right.
So this goes on the back of the horn. This is a 1-inch on the 12 on the CPX 12. It's a 1-inch driver. Again, high quality spring-loaded terminals on the back.
Yeah, it looks very, very solid and built very well.
And it screws right on the back. So it's, again, different price points. Sometimes you run into tweeters, inexpensive components. You can see this is a very high quality driver, and it sounds great.
Yeah, I've owned some speakers in my time, and I was always the kind of gadget guy that would want to take them apart and fix them if something went wrong. And definitely between the woofer and the driver there, I can say those are some great components, and I could tell that these are great speakers. Next, I want to talk about the amp. I think that's an amplifier you have there.
It is. Actually, before we get into the amp,
is that from one of these speakers that you took apart, or?
No, it's down right down here. Has a mixer built right in the back. You have a microphone input, a line input with XLR and RCA, and then you have a XLR output if you want to chain your speakers together, which is really helpful. And then you have your 2 input levels, your master level, and then bass and treble. And you have your overload light, your clip light, which we'll talk about in a minute, and your power. And then it's also switchable. So if you have to send them to someplace that's 220, you can do that. That's really cool. There's different classes of amplifiers, class A, B, different ones. This is a class D amplifier, and it is actually, here's the back of it.
That looks very cool.
Yeah, a couple of things we did, again, to make it a more professional speaker, a better ownership experience, is all the wire harnesses on here, you can take right off. A lot of things are soldered, and if you need to replace a module or anything, you end up having to, how many times have you heard someone say, oh, I got to solder it off the board? This, you just unplug everything, things pop right out. So this is the power supply right here. This is what's called a switching power supply. And what that means is it takes the power off the wall and sends it right to the speakers. It's switching very quickly. Typically, in the past, you would have a huge, and you've probably seen this, you'd have a huge coil that would weigh a ton, like right in the middle of your speaker. This and this replace it. These are called filter caps, What this does is actually holds the power. So on a CPX, and I was actually testing some other speakers yesterday, when you turn the CPX off, you'll notice the power and the overload light will flash a couple times, off and on. And what that's doing is it's dissipating the power that the filter caps are holding, which is kind of cool. Also, the big thing with these is if there was ever a momentary interruption, power on the wall, these hold enough power that it'll keep it going. So if you're at a gig and someone turns on the air conditioner, and you've been at home where your lights kind of flicker for a second, if someone, turns something on, turns on the washer, dryer, whatever, you would never know it with this because the filter caps are going to hold the power. You'll also notice a heat sink right here. This whole thing is actually a heat sink, which is really cool, kind of hard to see. But this is actually lifted on the board. You have a chain. In the range that the CPX is, it's rare to find this much thoughtfulness and design
yeah, I think
in an amplifier.
That's very sophisticated, and you make a great point about that too, because I would notice when I was doing mobile parties, I would have a vertigo or something like that, and I would plug in my light, so I was doing my duty cycle thing, and my speaker would pop.
Wow, duty cycle! I haven't heard that in a while.
Who remembers that? But no, it's very cool, and I'm glad that this webinar is here in Los Angeles, because I don't know what would happen if you try to take that through TSA somewhere.
I have, actually.
But speaking of travel, I wanted to talk really quick about the CPX series speaker, and it does have a nickname, the Road Warrior. Where did the name Road Warrior come from?
Well, that's a great question, Edgar. We looked at a lot of different speakers, and keep in mind we started with the APX Power Pro, which people, in fact, people in the office still use and love. And in the price range we were trying to go at, there were a lot of lightweight speakers, but they were running into issues, cabinet flex, and which would affect the sound on the low end especially. The resonance wasn't good, and then if they were dropped or something, you'd get cracked speakers, and they just didn't feel high quality. And so we actually looked at speakers that were $800, $900, and we wanted to bring those same features and that same quality down to a more affordable level, and we didn't want to compromise the cabinet. We could have easily, gone and gotten an off-the-shelf speaker, but we actually designed this one ourselves. I just happen to have a CPX 12 speaker right here.
Nice.
So,
and I think all the parts for it too.
Wow. But you can lay it down as a monitor. You'll notice it's very thick as far as the material used to build it. It has the monitor cut, has replaceable handles, which again, a lot of the other ones in this range have built-in handles. People don't break handles from picking up the speaker, but say someone shuts a tailgate or something gets dropped on it, and I've seen it where handles on the top that are integrated have a big crack on them.
Oh yeah.
These you can actually replace.
Nice.
Come in. You have fly points integrated right on the top. You have a fly point here right on the back as well to adjust it. You have the speaker, the pole to put it on a stand right on the bottom. And again, and I don't know if we should drop it or not here,
No.
probably cause too much commotion, but this is we came up with Road Warrior because you can literally drop these, kick them around, do whatever, and you're not going to damage the cabinet. Now the flip side of that is it added a little bit more weight. So there are speakers that are lighter than this out. But here's how close we came. So there's the most popular 12-inch speaker on the market, sells for about $850. Made by a very reputable company, and we'll talk about that in a minute. This weighs within 2 pounds of that. So that one weighs 41 pounds, our 12-inch weighs 43 pounds. So again, if you're looking at the higher quality speakers, there's a reason they don't do them really, really light, because they would have to sacrifice somewhere else. And with the CPX, we didn't sacrifice. We wanted a no compromise Road Warrior Spirit speaker that you could throw in the back of your car, install in your club, hang in the tent, uses floor monitors. And it's also going to give you better sound because it's going to have better resonance. All the sound's coming out the front. It's not vibrating around on the sides and the back.
Well, that's good. I mean, I think weight kind of lets you know that you're making a good investment. It goes with anything that you have, whether it's power tools or anything like that. The lighter something is, the more likely it is to break on you or be unreliable. But to have a speaker that has such well components, a little bit of weight I think is okay, because the insides are very important. They're built very well. So yeah, I think Road Warrior is the perfect name for the CPX series speaker. And yeah, I'm really glad we were able to see that. But now there's something that we unfortunately can't do we can't really do a live speaker demo because we're on, a webinar, and we can't really make your speaker sound like the CPX series speaker. But
it's like those TV commercials where they say, "Look how clear the TV is," and you're watching it on your TV.
Don't buy a TV because of a commercial. But what can we do since we can't do a live speaker demo? What do you suggest?
That's a good question, Edgar. What we did, what we came up with is, sound professionals all the time use what's called an RTA and a pink noise generator, and manufacturers like us use that all the time as well. And the goal of any speaker, whether it's Edgar's studio monitors or a club doing an install, especially a live sound club, is to get a nice flat sound. You don't want big gaps in your sound. You don't want big spikes in your sound. You want it to have a nice smooth curve. If you've looked at owner's manuals of a lot of speakers, in the back you'll see like a square, and you'll see the frequencies along the bottom, and you'll see like a curve. They also have it for microphones as well. And you want a nice smooth curve. If you don't, that means that you're going to have to fix that on your EQ later. And speakers today are much, much better than they used to be. One of the things we see all the time is on inexpensive speakers, active speakers typically, they will cross over the horn higher than they should, and they'll have the woofer roll off before that. And what that does, that protects the horn so it can take more abuse and not blow out, not get damaged. But the woofer starts to fade and you end up with a gap. And we've all been to a wedding or a show and someone has inexpensive speakers and the music sounds okay, and then they get on the mic and you think Charlie Brown's teacher's talking to you and you're like, what is going on?
Yeah.
And that is what happens, is where the woofer's rolling off, horns crossed over a little too high, they end up with a big gap, and that big gap is right where your voice is. So I'm kind of getting off the subject, but all speaker manufacturers want to have a nice flat sound, a nice flat curve. What we did yesterday was I had some fun with my iPad and spectrum analyzer and pink noise and all that. And I did pink noise on, again, the most popular 12-inch speaker that's been out about 4 years. It, typically street price around $849. Sometimes they do rebates and all that. It's by a great company, great speaker. And to give you, since we can't demo sound, I thought we'd give you kind of a visual. So what we're going to look at is, there it is. That we're going to call it Speaker K, and that's with pink noise and just 62 dB. It's not so much about the output, but you can see the frequencies along the bottom, and you can see the curve, and that's pretty good. There's a little gap there, and there's
kind
a
of
few
in the middle, right?
Yeah, and you have some spikes there. And keep in mind, this is an $850 street price speaker, and that's really good. And this speaker sounds great. I've heard people with them. Some of our people here actually have them as well. It's a great, great speaker. So what we're trying to do is come out with something that's going to sound that good, that smooth, but a little bit more affordable. So why don't we bring up, and this is a 12-inch Speaker K is, now we'll bring up Speaker CPX.
Nice, that looks pretty even.
Yeah, Speaker CPX actually is going to be a little bit smoother in some areas. It actually goes down a little bit deeper as well on the low end. And we got a little spike there towards the top. I don't know what that's
So
about.
towards the left there, what you're seeing is the low end?
Yeah, and towards the right is the high end. And then the middle is where most of your music's going to be.
Okay.
And this isn't to say ours is better than that or one's better than the next one.
But it is definitely 3 times less as far as the cost.
Right. What we're looking at is a speaker that has a street price around $850 versus a speaker that has a street price of around $250.
Nice.
So the output of the Speaker K that we're talking about, it's actually going to get louder. It is going to sound a little bit better. And it's great. I'm not trying to talk anyone out of buying anything. What I am trying to do is say, we think we did a pretty good job at $250 street price speaker that's going to be road warrior. That's going to be used to have all the different versatility, fly it, use it as a monitor.
Yeah.
And also, if you put them side by side and actually look at what they're putting out rather than hearing it, we're going to be really close. And in some ways, we're actually going to be smoother.
Good. Well, you brought up a lot of good features and points about the CPX speaker. Let's talk about now how, speaker uses, not so much just the specific CPX, but let's say, now that I have speakers, how do I want to use them? How do I want to set them up? Can you kind of go over that?
Sure. There's one of the biggest things is how to set up your speakers. How do I want to use them? Actually, we're going to back up just a second from that. We talked about a few minutes ago what blows speakers. One of the biggest challenges, and I was at an event not too long ago, and they had a killer sound system. It was a portable, have you guys seen the trucks that turn into stages? They fold them out. It was really cool. It was on the beach, and they had a band playing, and it sounded great. And then the guy got on the mic, and he had to stand about 80 feet back. It sounded so bad. It was so loud. And one of the biggest challenges I see, whether it's bands or DJs, and I think more on the DJ side because they don't come from the sound background, they come from the I love music and want to make people dance background, is not knowing how it sounds on the dance floor. So every time you're out, do your sound check, set up your speakers before people get there, walk out to the middle of the dance floor, listen to it, turn it up, look at where your settings are, kind of get an idea, okay, I'm at 5 on my master and 3 on my channel, okay, that's where I'm at, it sounds good. Go to the head table, walk around, see how it sounds over there, get on your mic, see how it sounds around the room, and then as people start coming in, do it again. And then as the room fills up, as everyone's on the dance floor again, walk out there. The last thing you want to do is have it where you're behind your system thinking you're having the best night in the world. You are on, your mixes are great, you're reading the crowd, you're almost like Edgar is every night, just keeping it going. Everyone's really enjoying themselves. And then people start leaving the dance floor and you're like, what's going on? And nobody tells you, but it sounds terrible out there, that something's happened, or now that the room's full, it sounds different. It's not as loud as it should be. It's too loud. Also, just because you have big loudspeakers doesn't mean you have to turn them up all the way every time.
Right.
I was at a wedding recently. I was actually next to a wedding and I walked over and it was this DJ he'd spent a lot of money on speakers and it was so loud, people weren't dancing because it was so loud. It was crazy. And the guy was behind the system, rocking out, and it was terrible. So main thing, so you get to the room. We're gonna say Jose gets to the room. Where does he set? He's looking around. Where are my outlets? Where am I gonna set up my uplighting? Oh, I got battery powered uplighting. That's awesome. I don't need to worry about outlets. Little plug there. Where am I gonna set up my speakers? They point out where the table's gonna be. Now he needs to set up his speakers. Typically, you're gonna try to set them up in corners if you can, because that's gonna turn the walls into horns, where it's actually gonna project the sound a little bit better. So if me and Edgar were doing a gig right here, if I could, I'm gonna set them out against the walls. If we were closer to the wall, I would set them up in the corners. And typically the distance is gonna be about halfway between, like if I'm in the middle and it's 20 feet to each wall, I'm gonna set up my speakers about 10 feet on each side. Okay. So it's kind of almost a third of the room setup, a third of the distance from the wall. Okay. And then also, if you just keep in mind, if you put your speakers on stands, which is great, you're going to lose about 20% of your bass. So that's why a lot more people use subwoofers. If you put your speakers on the ground, you're going to get more bass, but what's going to happen to the highs?
Are they going to be louder? Or?
No, if they're on the ground, people.
Oh, they're going to get blocked.
Yeah, they're going to get blocked, so the highs aren't going to be as good. So you got to think about that stuff as well. Also think about if you're using the microphone, where people are going to do the toast and all that, you don't want to put a speaker right by them, so when they go to do the toast, it's feeding back or you're having to turn it down. If you're in a band and you're using speakers, you want to make sure they're in front of the stage so that the microphone's not feeding back. Right. And again, typically when you're sound checking a band, you're going to walk out, stand back by the bar, have the band play, listen to how it sounds, and then come back and make your adjustments.
That makes a lot of sense, because when I see a lot of professional shows, whether it's for EDM music or for concerts, you always see the sound guy right next to the lighting guy, which is in front of the stage and right in the center. So that makes a lot of sense.
Well, and a lot of times the performer, whether you're in a band or a DJ, once they're going and they're caught up, they're like, okay, I'm playing now. Everything, my setup's done, I'm playing, and they don't realize the changes that are going on and they forget about the speakers. And so even though you're doing that, you might put a little reminder down that says, hey, you know what, I'm gonna, at 9:30, I'm gonna take a little stroll and make sure it sounds good everywhere around. Also, one thing that's super important, when your speakers are out here and you're a band or a DJ, you're hearing the treble from the back of the speaker, the side of the speaker. Please don't adjust it so it sounds good to you. This happens quite a bit. People turn up the treble, speakers are over there and they go, oh, it sounds really good to me. And then out on the dance floor or in the audience, people's hair is literally catching on fire because the treble is so intense. So again, you want it to sound good out there. You don't want it to sound, don't worry as much about how it sounds here. If you want it to sound good back by you, what could you do, Edgar?
Get a monitor.
That's the right answer. You can get them. Are monitors expensive these days?
No, they're not.
No, they're not. For a couple $100 or even less, you can get a monitor, and it's going to help you do a better job.
Well, all of that brings me to a point, I heard a long time ago when I was first starting out becoming a DJ, and I don't know if this is true, but is it true that as the night goes on, your hearing actually gets worse, and that's what causes DJs to start turning up the speakers because they think it's not as loud anymore, and that's what causes clipping? Because what I always did as a rule of thumb is I would always watch my meters and start off in the green, because I know red is bad. But I know that my ears and probably the audience, their hearing goes down a little bit, but I would never try to get to the middle of the yellow or even peak red. If I saw red, I would just bring it down right away just to make sure good sound. Is that true?
That is true, Edgar. We didn't plan on talking about that, but yes, what actually happens is, how many times have you walked out of a concert or a club and your friend goes, hey, the car's over here, and you're walking over there because you didn't hear your friend, and they grab you by the shoulder, no, the car's over here, and you're like, oh, I didn't hear you. What happens is, when you go into a loud environment, your ears actually have limiters that bring the volume down about 10%. And so a lot of times at the beginning of the night, when the music's not very loud and you're eating dinner and the salad and they're doing the toast, your limiter's not kicked in. And then once they bring the music up, your limiter kicks in. And that's just like Edgar brought up a great point. That's where you're like, hey, it doesn't seem as loud. Let me turn it up a little bit more. Now, here's a tip for you as far as being able to hear when you get older, and you'll hear about aging rock stars now.
What's that?
Aging rock stars who can't hear as well. Typically your high end, your treble goes first, but I don't know if anyone out there has a beer when they go out or whatever, but if you drink when you go out, it disables the limiter on your ears. That's why a lot of people go to rock concerts or go to a club and they're like, man, it was so loud, it sounded so good. And they're absolutely telling the truth, because when you have a few drinks, it's not that funny, this is serious.
Relate to this, yeah.
When you have a few drinks, your limiter goes away on your ear, and it actually, you are hearing it louder. But what happens then is the limiter's there to protect your ears from damage. Over time, that damages your ears, and that's why you're seeing a lot of musicians, and in about 10 years, we'll see DJs, we'll see David Guetta going, oh, my hearing's going, or different people, oh, my hearing's going. Yeah, and now we're seeing it with all the rock and rollers are going, my hearing's not what it used to be, and that's because, and I'm not saying they drink, but the effects of alcohol takes away your limiter in your ear, and it damages your ears. I'm actually going to segue into something too. One thing too, when you're setting up your speakers, make sure you can see the back of them if they're active speakers. It used to be that you could look down at your amp and see that you're clipping, and you would just turn it down. Now your speakers over here, you have your VMS4 controller, VMS 4.1 or whatever in front of you, and you can see the meters on that, but you can't see what's going on with your speakers. Take a minute, go over, look at what's going on the back of your speakers, whether it's your CPX or whatever. Also, turn them up and control everything from your preamp or your controller or your mixer. We had someone not too long ago, we have an awesome sub, the PXW18P, and it was in a club, and there's a fair amount of clubs that use them and they love them, they work great. And this one guy kept blowing it up. And so I told our sales rep, I said, let me call this guy, what's going on? And we'd get the woofer in and it would be burnt, the coil, just like we talked about earlier. And the guy said, I don't know what's going on. I have this thing turned down to 3 and my DJs are still blowing it. So what's happening is if you turn the volume down on the back of your active speaker or on your power amp, it's going to go into distortion quicker, it's going to heat up, and it's going to blow quicker. So typically on the back of your active speakers, you want to set it about 80%, or sometimes people set it at 0 dB, which is another good way to go, which is 12 o'clock. But you don't want to turn the speakers down and crank everything up here, because then it's just going to go into distortion a lot quicker, and it's going to blow up, and it's going to sound distorted, and it's going to sound bad. Too much power typically doesn't damage speakers. It's distortion and heat and being overdriven. So you want to turn them up on the back, control everything from here throughout the night, walk over, look at the back, make sure it's not clipping. If it is clipping, what should we do?
Just turn it down.
Turn it down. Or another thing, when a speaker is taking power, like say you're sending 500 watts to a speaker, the bass takes 5 times more power than the highs. So sometimes you'll put on a song, and we just had this happen at LDI. Someone brought in their own music and said, let me hear this. off my phone on these. And it was a terrible recording, and it was tons of bass. And the speakers that had sounded amazing, at least that's what they tell me, all day long, all of a sudden were clipping and didn't sound good because the song had so much low end that it was soaking up all the power. So the speaker wouldn't get loud trying to put out the low end. So the other thing you can do is if your speakers are starting to clip, you can walk over, turn the bass down just a little bit, no one will even notice, and you'll watch the clip lights just turn off. Because it takes 5 times more power to produce the low end than it does the high end. So you just take a little bit of the load off, and there you go. And then add a subwoofer.
Well, thanks, Tom. That's a lot of information that we covered as far as CPX series speaker setting up, how to set up correctly. And just real quick, as I'm looking over here, I'm noticing something that I want to touch on. I see that next to CPX 12A, you have 500 watts. Now, I remember from when I was shopping for speakers, and even now when I go to retail stores, I see speakers that are inexpensive, and they're claiming to be 1,000 watts, 2,500 watts. What can you say about that?
We see that all the time. In fact, people say, I could sell more of these if you put a sticker on the front that said 2,500 watts, or with our ELS, our awesome, inexpensive speakers that are very reliable and sound great. We get that all the time in that segment of the market. In fact, a lot of our competitors say 1,000 watts. And I was doing some work for the guys, some comparison work the other day, and most of our competitors that say 1,000 watts are typically about 335 watts. And to their credit, when you get into the owner's manual, it'll say that anywhere from 335 watts to 400 watts. They just put peak power alleged on the speaker. When it gets to lower end speakers, our ELS has competitors that say 2,000 watts, 2,500 watts. That is just not anything useful. Our ELS is typically about 200 watts, and we were trying to think of a way to demonstrate it here. And really, at the end of the day, watts is just something people think they can hang on to, like horsepower in a car. You don't really talk about how fast it is. You talk about, when you're looking in a magazine or whatever, you go, how much horsepower is it? And that signifies, horsepower equates to speed in a car, whereas watts, you would think, would equate to the output. At the end of the day, you want a speaker that's going to give you enough sound for what you're doing, that's going to give you a sound you like, and that's going to be versatile enough to handle all your applications. Now, and I have a picture on my computer, I went to a store one day and set up our ELS 15A, which is about 200 watts RMS, and another speaker that was 2,500 watts, claimed, looked identical, and another speaker that was claimed to be 1,800 watts. Wow. And I was with the salespeople, and we turned it up, and they all clipped at the same point. They were all the same output as far as how loud they were, the actual sound coming out. So then the question is, we're thinking about it like horsepower. If I have a car that'll go 75 miles an hour and it's 200 horsepower, that would be great. If I have a car that's 2,000 horsepower and goes 75 miles an hour, what would you say? You'd say that's the most inefficient car ever, or the manufacturer's lying to me and it's not 2,500 watts. So at the end of the day, those claims, a lot of them are bogus. You just want to, a lot of them are made up. And it happened with amplifiers. At the end of the day, you want to make sure your speaker is giving you enough sound, and you want to make sure that it's versatile enough and sounds good. In fact, sometimes I get a little fired up. It's like if someone makes a false claim on a product, whether it's an amplifier or speaker about power, it's almost like and one thing American DJ and American Audio is known for is a relationship with customers. If you call our service department, seen us at trade shows, whether it's Mobile Beat or NAMM or LDI or whatever, we're a family-owned company. We stand behind what we do. We love everybody. We do our best to help everybody. And that's why we don't put that stuff on there. If you're buying from a company that's lying to you right off the bat to get you to buy their product, is that who you want to do business with? So that's my little rant for the day. But yeah, just make sure enough sound, sounds good, versatile enough. Don't go buy the stickers that say 2,500 watts, 1,000 watts. We could easily do that too, and we'd probably sell more speakers, but we don't want to start our relationship that way.
Right on. Well, that's a good point that you made, and I'm glad you said that, because now it gives me more knowledge, and I hope it gives all the people watching knowledge as far as when you're going to go out and purchase a speaker. Power is great, and you definitely want that power, but what people really look for, like in a car, is any car could go 75 miles per hour, but what really matters is features. And we took apart a CPX-12, we looked at the insides, we saw the great features and benefits of the components that are inside the speakers. So definitely a lot of knowledge. Thank you, Tom. And at this time, if there's anybody out there watching that has any questions at this time that want to ask either Tom or myself, we can do questions now.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Hey,
Hey.
Jose.
Jose here, and we do have a few questions on the chat room. Big shout out to everybody on the chat room. So the question for one of the speakers, the 8-inch, does it come in a monitor wedge?
Yes, all of them are designed to have the monitor cut. From the 8, 10, 12, and 15 CPX, they're all used as monitors.
Good question.
It's a great monitor too.
Excellent. Next question is, do these speakers go to 11?
Sure.
What does that mean?
No, they go to 10. But yeah, they go to 10. We should make one that goes to 11. It's a great idea.
That
Spinal
was
Tap.
by DJ Charles Green.
Love that. Yeah.
All right, our next question is,
He's from Canada too. I know that guy.
all right, so here it is. Quick question. Do these speakers sound good for people who are 100 feet away in a huge gym, as does for people up close, or do I need a bigger model?
Well, they didn't really mention the size they were talking about, but what I can tell you is we've used these in big rooms before, and they sound great. And I recently had someone install 4 of them in a school gymnasium, replacing some 30-year-old Altec Lansings that had worked awesome. And these were an upgrade in the sound, and they covered the gym just fine. So it depends on the application, indoor, outdoor, and all that. But with the 60 by 90 degree horn, they do have a nice throw to them, and they will throw the sound quite far.
Cool. Another question is, do these series have a sub?
Not right now. We do offer our PXW 15P and 18P sub, which sound great with these. Anyone who was at the LDI show, at the Elation booth, they only used 2 of the PXW 18P.
And it sounded great.
Yeah, and then 2 of our Sense series on top. It was amazing how much we got out of 2 subs and 2 tops. But we're working on one that has a similar look and feature set as these. So we don't have it quite yet. We're working on a sub, but in the
Nice.
meantime, our PXW subs work great.
Yeah.
Cool. That's pretty much the only question for right now. There was a question of what these speakers were made out of, if they were wood or plastic.
It's a composite plastic.
Composite plastic.
Yeah.
Cool.
Excellent.
All right.
I want to remind our viewers, if you have any further questions, go ahead and post them up on the chat room, and we'll try to get to them as they come in.
All right, good. Well, there you have it. CPX series active speakers. You got the insides and outs of the speaker, and thanks to Tom, definitely a lot more knowledge as far as when you're out in the market for a speaker or you want to know more about the speaker that you have. Thank you guys for watching webinar number 2 here at ADJ. Tom, any closing comments?
No, thank you so much. My email address is tomf@americandj.com. If you have any questions about CPX or anything related to American Audio, I'm an easy guy to get a hold of. Shoot me an email. Keep tuned into the adj.com site. We have more webinars planned. I think the next one is Under the Hood, and those are always fun and exciting. So, and we're always trying to do this stuff to give back to you. So stay tuned, I guess is what they say.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you guys for watching, and we hope that this helps you out. And of course, all of our webinars are going to be full of information and fun. So thank you guys, and have a great weekend.